In this mini lesson, you're going to learn how to find the volume of a cone. Before we get started, we want to talk about what a cone is. A cone is a three-dimensional figure with one circular base and a surface that travels from the circumference of the circle and narrows to a point that is called the vertex. To find the volume of a cone, we want to use a formula that is V equals 1/3 pi times the radius squared times the height. So if you notice, pi r squared times the height was what we just talked about as the volume of a cylinder. So if you notice, this looks very similar to a cylinder where we have a circular base, but if we went straight up and had an identical circular base, we would create that cylinder. The difference is here that we don't have it go straight up to another circular base. Instead, we kind of shave off the sides until we get to a point in the very center. So what happens is, if we had a cylinder and a cone that had the same radius and the same height, they would be almost identical in their volumes, except that the cone would be 1/3, exactly 1/3 the size of that cylinder. So that's why our formula looks this way. We can also write our formula as V equals pi r squared times the height, meaning like our volume of the cylinder, and then divide the entire thing by 3. So same exact thing, it's just written two different ways. I prefer to use this first method so that I can plug it in the calculator all at the same time. That is up to you, but that's what I'm going to use in this tutorial. So let's talk about some examples. Let's say our first example, let's say our cone has a radius of 3.5 and a height of 5. So what I'm going to do is start plugging in 3.5 for r, the radius, and 5 for h, the height, into our formula. So again, I'm going to plug in this number for r and this number for h. So I'm going to rewrite this down here where V stands for the volume that we are solving for. 1/3 is just a number, it's part of our formula, so we're going to bring it on down, times pi, times r squared is now going to be 3.5 squared. And since there's so many little dots, one being the decimal, two of them being multiplication, I'm going to change this so that this looks like multiplication here, or that it's very clear that it's multiplication. So 3.5, and then that whole thing is raised to the second power, times h, which is 5. So we have plugged in for r, plugged in for h, and now our formula is ready to go. Everything on the right side, they're just all numbers that we can plug right into the calculator. So I'm going to pull out the calculator, move it over here, turn it on, and here are the ones from the last tutorial. We're going to clear that out, and we're going to type this in. Now, when I type in 1/3, personally, I like to put 1/3 in parentheses, and remember to open up your parentheses, and 1/3 just means 1 divided by 3. Your fraction just represents that division. Close the parentheses, times, hit our pi button, times, and I can use parentheses here as well, so 3.5 is our radius, that is raised to the second power, and times 5. So now everything looks here exactly as I have it in green, just instead of those little dots, we see little star symbols. So I'm going to click enter. And our volume should be about 64.1. Volume is 64.1. There we go. And I didn't give any units on this one, so how about let's just write it as though we don't know what the units are. So where normally we would put inches cubed or centimeters cubed, we can just say units cubed. This would be considered the volume of our cone. Now, I probably should have drawn everything on our figure up here. So if we'd like to go back and look at that, our radius here is 3.5. Just as we saw with the cylinder, that center of the circle out to any one of the sides of our circle is going to be considered a radius. So this is 3.5. Now our height looks a little bit different here. We do not want this slant height, okay? We don't want that. Instead, we want to go from the center of the circle straight up to the vertex. That is going to be our height, which in this case is 5. Okay, let's try another example. So I'm going to give a little sketch. Here's my circular base up to a vertex. I'm going to draw my little lines out to the side, and that's just a little sketch of what a cone could look like here. All right, so let's say in our second example that our radius is going to be 3.1, let's call it inches. Our height, we're going to say is 7.2 inches. And we want to recall that our formula for the volume of a cone is 1/3 times pi times our radius squared times the height. Okay, if we'd like to, we can go to our little sketch over here and show that our radius here is 3.1. That's the same thing as r, that's what we're plugging in for r. And h, our height, is that tall section from the center of the circular base up to the vertex. H is going to be 7.2. We could even include our units on our picture as well. Now what we're going to do is we're going to plug in 3.1 for the radius and 7.2 for the height. Everything else should remain the same. So V, which stands for our volume, the volume that we're looking for, equals 1/3 times pi times our radius here is going to be 3.1. Again, I'm going to use parentheses just because there's a lot of dots on our screen. So 3.1 is then going to be squared. Don't forget your square on the radius. Times our height, which is 7.2. And again, it's got a period or a decimal there as well. So I'm going to go ahead and put that 7.2 in parentheses. It doesn't change the value of our equation, it just makes it a little bit clearer to look at and understand. Okay, so now everything on the right side is complete. We've plugged in everything we need to know, and everything we know, and we can just plug it into the calculator. So we want to type in 1/3 in parentheses times pi, which we have to click second on my calculator to get to pi, times, again, I'm going to use parentheses to put 3.1, which is our radius, close the parentheses, and then square what's inside the parentheses, meaning we're squaring the radius, 3.1, times, so again, open the parentheses and put 7.2. Close the parentheses, and everything is there, so we're going to click enter. So we have 72.5 if we round to the nearest tenth. So let's write that. Our volume equals, and everything on the right side ended up to be 72.5. And again, we actually did have units this time. We had inches. Remember, we plug in our inches. Those inches are then squared, so that gives us 2 of them. But then also 7.2 is another set of inches. So we have inches cubed. And that is how you find the volume of a cone.